Morning, everyone. I'm Judson Reid with Cornell Cooperative Extension, here with my colleague Elisabeth Hodgdon of the Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Team. And we're at the Cornell Willsboro Research Farm in one of our high tunnels where we conduct research on spinach. Specifically, spinach grown in the late fall, over the winter, and into the spring. And our research is focused on how much nitrogen, fertilizer nitrogen, does this crop require? What is the response of this spinach to different rates of nitrogen and different sources of nitrogen? We got into this work several years ago, and the reason was that growers, commercial growers, we found were using very different rates of nitrogen than what Cornell was recommending. For example, some growers told us they were using 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Others were up to 600 pounds of nitrogen per acre, whereas the Cornell suggested rate might be closer to 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Why does this matter? There's some concerns with putting out excess amounts of nitrogen in terms of nitrate accumulation in the crop, the fate of that nitrogen in the soil and in the atmosphere, and the cost to the grower of that nitrogen. Can we fine-tune our nitrogen rates? So over the last 4 or 5 years, we have been looking at the rate of nitrogen and the source of nitrogen and the spinach crop's response to this.
So yeah, we're here at the Willsboro farm today in Essex County. We're in a high tunnel that's just a single layer of plastic, unheated. The tunnel is 20 by 48 feet, so a relatively small high tunnel. We transplanted the spinach on October 1st this past fall, and our treatments consist of 2 different organic nitrogen fertilizers at 4 different rates. And so we're testing Pro Booster and Feather Meal. Those are both products available from North Country Organics. And Pro Booster consists of a mix of different plant and animal-based meals. It also contains some Chilean nitrate, which is a quicker releasing available form of nitrogen for the plant. That's a 10-0-0 product. We also tested Feather Meal, which is processed feather byproducts, and that's 13-0-0. And that is all feathers, and that's more insoluble than the Pro Booster. The Pro Booster, again, contains some Chilean nitrate, more water soluble nitrogen. We tested those 2 different fertilizers at 0, which is our control, our comparison, 65, 130, and 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre equivalent in our plots. And so we have these plots here today that are in a randomized complete block design. So these are our plots here, and we used a plant spacing that's similar to what the commercial high tunnel growers are using in our area. So we have 3 rows of spinach, and the rows are 6 inches apart. Each group of 2 plants is 5 inches apart. So we have a fairly dense planting. We started harvesting in early November. We had kind of a warm November this past fall, so we got 2 harvests in November, another in December. And during our harvest, we would harvest the whole plot and weigh that yield. And then, the spinach overwintered, and we had our first harvest of the spring about 3 weeks to 4 weeks ago. And then we're harvesting again today. It's April 9th. The spinach overwintered well, and we have some really nice green lush growth now that the days are longer and the temperatures are warmer.
So early on, our research suggested that the greens crop really did not need those high levels of nitrogen. We were seeing similar yield between no nitrogen or very low rates of nitrogen compared to the higher rates of nitrogen. However, our work here over the last couple of years, particularly 2020 over into 2021, is showing some response both to the source of nitrogen and the rate of nitrogen. So I'm going to ask Elisabeth to share with us, what do some of those results look like this spring? What did we see in the fall, and what are we seeing in the spring in terms of source and rate of nitrogen, Elisabeth?
So we did see the strongest differences, or the most noticeable differences in yields in our first harvest, which was at the beginning of November. So we did find, in particular, we harvested much more spinach from the 200 pounds per acre Pro Booster versus the control.
Yep.
We found significantly higher yields from Pro Booster versus feather meal.
Yes.
And so we did see kind of, what we would hypothesize from a fertilizer experiment where, the higher the rate of nitrogen, the greater the yield. And then in our second harvest in November, we also saw statistically significant differences between the control and then 130 and 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre.
So control was 0 pounds of nitrogen.
Yes,
right?
and I think there are some growers that sometimes might not apply any nitrogen when they're putting in their winter greens. Some people will rely on leftovers from tomatoes or other warm season crops. So
yeah, that was one of the original questions here is, can the winter crop in a sense kind of coast on any leftover fertility from the summer crop in a high tunnel? But what we're seeing is maybe the opposite. Maybe the summer crop is coasting on some nitrogen that might be left over possibly from the winter crop. But if I understand you correctly, what we saw this past winter was feather meal, as you and I were talking about earlier, really does not have soluble nitrogen available to the crop immediately compared to the Pro Booster.
Exactly.
Which we're not trying to favor that product, but it's one that's commercially available and common in this part of the country. And it has multiple sources of nitrogen and particularly nitrate nitrogen that's immediately available. And you saw that this November, combined with warm weather and soluble nitrogen and a moderate to higher rate, so 130 or 200 pounds, the spinach responded with increased yield. And you and I just did a quick back of the envelope calculation that showed that increase in yield could play out to be a couple $1,000s over the space of a commercial sized high tunnel, right?
Yeah, we were just using some spinach prices that we've heard from growers in our area. It could be, upwards of about $2,000 more harvest per tunnel. So yeah, I'm looking forward to, again, using our complete yield data and delving a little deeper into the economics and looking at fertilizer costs and just trying to fine tune that recommendation. But so we did see those yield differences in the fall, or in November, I should say. But then we also did another harvest in mid-December. So by then the spinach was growing a little more slowly as the days were getting shorter. And we actually did not have any significant differences between treatments for that harvest. And we didn't see any differences in our March harvest. So it could be just maybe that burst of, readily available nitrogen and the plants are taking it up.
So we've got some meaningful results from this work. We're not done with it. We want to continue to investigate what is that ideal rate of nitrogen and what is the right timing of that nitrogen, the right source. But we do feel like we do have some meaningful data here for growers, and we look forward to working with those growers on fine-tuning their fertilization approach for winter greens.